Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Scientist. I'm glad you're here, whether you've tucked yourself in, dimmed the lights, or just needed something soft and curious to drift off to. Tonight, we'll be taking a slow, thoughtful journey into the deep past, a story that begins over 200 million years ago and continues to ripple through the world around us today. Yes, we're talking about dinosaurs, but not just the teeth and claws kind of tale. Tonight, we'll explore how these ancient creatures helped shape the modern world in ways you might never have expected. Now, I should warn you, this video may accidentally be too interesting. If it keeps you awake, I can only apologize, but at least you'll have a head full of strange and wonderful facts to entertain you until sleep finally arrives. On the other hand, if you nod off halfway through a sentence about feathered velociraptors or prehistoric composting, then I'll consider my mission accomplished. Before we get too cozy with Mesozoic mysteries, if you enjoy this gentle blend of science and storytelling, I'd be truly grateful if you could tap the like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and it lets me know these sleepy science sessions are reaching curious minds like yours. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Whether it's 3 in the afternoon or just gone midnight, I love seeing how far this little corner of calm can travel. Tonight's story isn't just about ancient fossils or thunderous footsteps. It's about how echoes from a forgotten age still shape the soil beneath our feet, the air we breathe, and even the scrambled eggs on our breakfast plate. It's a tale of extinction and endurance, of vast time scales and tiny birds. So let your mind soften and your breathing slow. There's nothing you need to do right now but listen. And just before we begin, please remember this is not medical advice or a substitute for professional help with sleep. It's simply a quiet journey through science, designed to bring a little wonder and peace to the end of your day. Earth has not always been a welcoming place for complex life. In fact, for the vast majority of its history, it was anything but. The early planet was a fiery, hostile ball of rock and gas, hammered by asteroids and scorched by volcanic fury. For millions of years, life existed only in the most basic forms, single-celled organisms clinging to hydrothermal vents, floating through shallow seas, or forming slimy microbial mats on bare rocks. It was not exactly the setting for a prehistoric blockbuster, but slow and steady over billions of years, something remarkable began to happen. Life got ambitious. The Cambrian period, beginning around 540 million years ago, marked a major turning point. It's often described as the Cambrian explosion, not because things literally went boom, but because evolution kicked into overdrive. Within a relatively short time, in geological terms, complex multicellular life emerged in all shapes and sizes. Animals with eyes, limbs, shells, and spines suddenly filled the oceans. Most major animal body plans that exist today had their roots in this time. You could think of the Cambrian seas as a kind of biological brainstorming session, with nature throwing out ideas just to see what would stick. While all this experimentation was happening underwater, the land remained largely barren, but that wouldn't last. By the time the Ordovician and Silurian periods arrived, plants were beginning to creep out of the water, starting with tiny moss-like pioneers that hugged the damp ground. Their success transformed the surface of the planet. These early colonizers helped create soils, trap moisture, and pump oxygen into the atmosphere. In their wake came the first terrestrial animals, arthropods like millipedes and scorpions, who tiptoed across the mossy carpet like cautious explorers. Then came the Devonian period, roughly 400 million years ago, and it brought with it a remarkable innovation: vertebrates that could walk on land. The stars of this evolutionary leap were the lobe-finned fish. These creatures had stout, fleshy fins supported by bones that, over time, became strong enough to bear weight. Some developed rudimentary lungs, allowing them to breathe air when oxygen levels in water dropped. Eventually, these features would give rise to the very first tetrapods, 4-limbed animals that crawled out of the shallows and into the open air. These pioneering tetrapods were a scrappy bunch. They looked like a cross between a salamander and a fish, and they likely spent much of their time in swampy margins, navigating a patchwork of rivers, lakes, and forests. but they represented something revolutionary. Vertebrate life had finally made it onto land. From these humble ancestors would come amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, including us. As the Carboniferous period unfolded, Earth became a greenhouse paradise. Warm, wet climates allowed dense forests to flourish across much of the planet. Towering trees, giant ferns, and bizarre plants with no modern equivalents covered the land in thick vegetation. Oxygen levels were unusually high, reaching levels around 35%, much higher than today. This abundance of oxygen allowed insects and arthropods to grow to impressive sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than a dinner plate zipped through the air. Millipedes over 6 feet long crawled through the undergrowth. The Carboniferous was a jungle world, pulsing with strange life. Amphibians thrived in these moist conditions, but they were still tied to water for reproduction. That limitation set the stage for another evolutionary leap, the amniotic egg. Unlike amphibian eggs, which needed to be laid in water, the amniotic egg could survive on dry land. It came with its own little survival kit, protective membranes, fluid-filled chambers, and a shell to keep everything safe. This single innovation allowed vertebrates to truly cut the cord from aquatic life. Enter the amniotes, the ancestors of reptiles, birds, and mammals. These early reptiles were small, scaly, and surprisingly agile. They had tough skin that resisted drying out, efficient lungs, and a metabolism that gave them an edge in drier climates. As the Permian period dawned, around 299 million years ago, these early reptiles began to diversify. Some evolved into predators with sharp teeth and fast reflexes. Others became bulky herbivores with crushing jaws and heavy armor. It was a time of evolutionary exploration. One especially interesting group that emerged during the Permian were the synapsids. These creatures are often misidentified as reptiles, but they were actually more closely related to mammals. They included species like Dimetrodon, famous for the large sail on its back. Though often portrayed as a dinosaur in popular media, Dimetrodon lived long before any true dinosaurs appeared. Its sail may have helped regulate body temperature, or perhaps played a role in courtship. Whatever its purpose, it was a striking feature on an already impressive animal. But evolution is never a straight line. Just as life was getting comfortable, Earth delivered one of its most dramatic curveballs, the Permian extinction, also known as the Great Dying. Around 252 million years ago, something triggered a series of catastrophic events that nearly wiped the slate clean. The leading suspect is massive volcanic activity in what is now Siberia, releasing enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. This greenhouse gas surge caused global temperatures to spike, oceans to acidify, and oxygen levels to plummet. It was an ecological meltdown. Around 90% of marine species went extinct, along with about 70% of land-based vertebrates. Coral reefs disappeared, forests collapsed, even insects suffered heavy losses. It was the most severe extinction event in Earth's history. The fossil record shows widespread devastation, but also the seeds of recovery. In the aftermath, life began to rebuild, but it was a different world. Many dominant species from the Permian vanished, and new groups emerged to fill the void. Among them were the archosaurs, a branch of reptiles that included the ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. These archosaurs had a few key advantages: upright posture, efficient breathing systems, and strong, fast limbs. As ecosystems began to recover in the early Triassic period, they were poised to take full advantage of the open niches, and so, out of the smouldering remains of one of Earth's greatest catastrophes, the stage was set for the rise of the dinosaurs. But their eventual dominance was not guaranteed. It was built on the backs of countless ancestors, from slimy tetrapods to sail-backed synapsids, and shaped by the brutal lessons of extinction. Before the dinosaurs ever set foot on the scene, Earth had already experienced triumph, innovation, and disaster on a scale almost too vast to comprehend. The planet had been scorched, flooded, frozen, and broken. Yet through it all, life persisted. It evolved, it adapted, and it prepared, quietly and steadily, for its next great chapter. In the long shadow of the Permian extinction, Earth entered a slow and uneasy recovery. The world was wounded, its ecosystems battered and reeling, but life had a habit of dusting itself off and trying again. In this new chapter, known as the Triassic period, the planet became a kind of evolutionary proving ground. What survived the Great Dying was now free to expand into empty niches, adapt to strange environments, and tinker with new forms. Among these experiments were the first true dinosaurs, small, fast, and barely noticeable at the time, yet destined to become some of the most iconic creatures in Earth's history. The Triassic began around 252 million years ago. At this point, all of Earth's major land masses were still fused into a single supercontinent called Pangaea. This sprawling, unbroken mass stretched from pole to pole, surrounded by a vast global ocean known as Panthalassa. On paper, it might seem like a peaceful arrangement, but in practice, it made for a wildly unpredictable climate. With so much land clustered together, the interior of the continent was far from the moderating influence of the sea. As a result, temperatures were extreme, summers scorched, winters chilled, rainfall was erratic and uneven. Deserts bloomed in the heart of Pangaea, while coastlines and rift valleys nurtured more temperate environments. Volcanic activity was frequent, and the atmosphere still bore the chemical scars of the Permian collapse. It was a world in flux, a hot, dry, restless stage in search of new players. Into this chaotic setting came the archosaurs. These reptiles were nimble, upright creatures with a leg up, quite literally, on the competition. Unlike the sprawling side-legged gait of most early reptiles, archosaurs had limbs positioned beneath their bodies. This allowed for more efficient locomotion and gave them a surprising edge in speed and stamina. The archosaur family tree would eventually branch into many forms, including crocodilians, pterosaurs, and most notably dinosaurs. But at this early stage, dinosaurs were not yet the rulers of anything. They were newcomers, eking out a living in a crowded, competitive world. The first true dinosaurs likely appeared around 230 million years ago, in what is now South America. Fossils from Argentina's Ishigualasto Formation offer some of the earliest glimpses of these proto-dinosaurs, slender, bipedal animals with long tails, sharp claws, and alert postures. One of the first confirmed dinosaurs was Eoraptor, whose name means dawn thief. It was small, fast, and probably omnivorous, capable of snapping up insects, small vertebrates, and maybe even bits of plant matter. Eoraptor wasn't especially flashy, but it carried the blueprint for what dinosaurs would become: lightweight bones, upright limbs, and a skull filled with sharp, serrated teeth. It didn't dominate the landscape, it simply made the most of it. Alongside Eoraptor were other early species like Herrerasaurus and Styracosaurus. These creatures shared a similar body plan: long hind limbs for running, short forelimbs, and an S-shaped neck. But they also displayed the first hints of specialization. Herrerasaurus, for example, was more heavily built and likely a dedicated predator, perhaps capable of tackling larger prey. These early theropods weren't large by modern standards, but in a world still recovering from mass extinction, they didn't have to be. Agility and adaptability counted for far more than bulk. Triassic dinosaurs came in several varieties, but all were relatively small and bipedal. There were early herbivores, like the sauropodomorphs, who would later evolve into the giant long-necked dinosaurs of the Jurassic. At this point, though, they were more modest in size, quick-footed browsers that moved through open woodlands in search of ferns and primitive conifers. There were also early armored species and others that simply defy easy classification, their skeletons bearing the marks of ongoing experimentation. These evolutionary trials weren't happening in a vacuum. The Triassic was filled with competitors. Crocline archosaurs known as pseudosuchians were everywhere, some with enormous jaws and scaly armor, others resembling strange hybrids of crocodile and monitor lizard. These creatures often outmatched early dinosaurs in size and strength. In fact, for much of the Triassic, pseudosuchians were the dominant predators on land. So what allowed the dinosaurs to hold on and eventually take over? It likely came down to a combination of factors. Their lightweight, air-filled bones made them more efficient movers. Their posture gave them a mechanical advantage. Their metabolism, while still a topic of debate, may have allowed for greater endurance and more active lifestyles. And their reproductive strategies, including the possibility of rapid growth and high offspring numbers, helped them bounce back from environmental stress. Meanwhile, the world itself was shifting. Pangaea was beginning to break apart, creating new coastlines, rift valleys, and island chains. This continental drift altered weather patterns, opened migration routes, and reshuffled ecosystems. As continents drifted apart, isolated populations evolved separately, driving diversification. It was an era of new opportunities, if you could survive the changes. Volcanic activity increased during the late Triassic, especially in the region that would become the Atlantic Ocean. These eruptions poured lava across vast swathes of land and released enormous amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The resulting climate change triggered yet another extinction event, smaller than the Permian, but still devastating. Many dominant reptile groups, including most pseudosuchians, vanished. And as had happened before, extinction cleared the field for new contenders. Dinosaurs, already flexible and opportunistic, were perfectly positioned to rise in the aftermath. With their main rivals gone, they expanded into new roles and habitats. They got bigger, faster, and more diverse. Over the next several million years, they would take over deserts, forests, river valleys, and floodplains. Herbivores grew long necks to browse tall vegetation. Predators evolved sharper teeth and claws. Some walked on all fours, others stayed upright. The age of dinosaurs had truly begun. But the roots of that dominance trace back to these unassuming Triassic pioneers, the small, sprightly proto-dinosaurs that darted through scrubby underbrush and hunted insects beneath conifer trees. They were not the rulers of their world, not yet. But they were survivors, and more importantly, they were innovators. It's easy to imagine the Triassic as a kind of dress rehearsal, with nature tweaking and revising, adjusting proportions and behaviors until something clicked. Evolution doesn't plan, of course. It improvises, reacts, and reuses. The dinosaurs succeeded not because they were destined to, but because they were equipped to seize a world in transition. Their story in the Triassic is not one of roaring giants or dramatic battles. It's a quieter, more patient narrative, of persistence through change, of anatomical innovation, and of ecosystems slowly bending toward a new future. It was a beginning born from ashes, written in lava flows and desert winds, where the smallest players would someday shape the greatest show Earth has ever staged. By the time the Jurassic period arrived, Earth had become a laboratory for giants. The early scrappy dinosaurs of the Triassic had laid the groundwork, but the Jurassic was when evolution decided to stop holding back. Size became a defining theme, and nature, perhaps with a gleam in its metaphorical eye, asked, how big can things really get? The answer, as it turns out, was astonishingly big. The breakup of Pangaea was well underway by this time, and the continents were beginning to drift apart. As new oceans formed and climates shifted, lush, wet environments spread across much of the globe. The arid deserts of the Triassic gave way to broad floodplains, fern-covered valleys, and conifer forests stretching as far as the eye could see. This ecological buffet created the perfect setting for the rise of the sauropods, those long-necked, small-headed, mountain-sized herbivores that came to dominate the Jurassic landscape. Sauropods weren't just big, they were living skyscrapers. Creatures like Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, and Apatosaurus pushed the boundaries of what a land animal could be. Brachiosaurus, for example, may have stood over 40 feet tall, taller than a 4-story building. Diplodocus stretched out to nearly 90 feet long, more than the length of a blue whale. Their tails could be used like whips, possibly to signal others or deter predators. Their necks, long as cranes, swept through trees like biological harvesters. But for all their mass and muscle, sauropods didn't rely on complexity. Their skulls were small, their teeth simple. Some could barely chew. Instead, they ripped vegetation in bulk and swallowed it whole, relying on their massive gut systems and internal fermentation to do the hard work. They may have carried stones in their bellies, gastroliths, to help grind up the tough plant matter. It was the digestive equivalent of throwing a salad through a rock tumbler and hoping for the best. Then there was their brain size, or lack thereof. Despite their enormous bodies, many sauropods had brains that weighed less than a grapefruit. In one species, the spinal cord at the base of the tail was wider than the brain itself. They didn't need much mental horsepower, though. Their success came from physical dominance, not clever tricks. In terms of brain-to-body ratio, they were closer to a loaf of bread than a clever fox, but that didn't stop them from becoming one of the most successful vertebrate groups in Earth's history. Their sheer size may have been a survival strategy. Being massive comes with perks, less threat from predators, access to tall vegetation, and efficient travel over long distances. But it also meant needing vast amounts of food and water. A herd of sauropods could strip a forest in short order, then plod on in search of greener pastures, reshaping the environment wherever they went. Their migrations probably left behind open spaces, trampled vegetation, and nutrient-rich dung that fertilized the soil and helped new plants grow. They were like living bulldozers, clearing and seeding the land in slow, rumbling cycles. Of course, such slow-moving giants would have been easy targets if not for the other half of the Jurassic equation, the theropods. These were the bipedal, often carnivorous dinosaurs that balanced the ecosystem with tooth and claw. While the sauropods loomed tall and slow, the theropods were quick, agile, and deadly efficient. And among them, a new apex predator was sharpening its teeth: Allosaurus. Allosaurus wasn't the biggest theropod ever, but it was one of the most successful predators of its time. Measuring up to 35 feet long, with sharp, serrated teeth and strong hind limbs, it likely hunted in packs or at least scavenged in social groups. Its skull was designed for slashing rather than crushing. Its bite may have been weaker than that of later theropods like Tyrannosaurus, but it made up for it with quick, repeated strikes, like a prehistoric machete with legs. Fossil evidence suggests that Allosaurus frequently tangled with sauropods. Bite marks on bones and healed wounds show a world of dramatic confrontations. Picture it: a herd of Camarasaurus grazing peacefully as a group of Allosaurus creeps through the undergrowth, eyes locked on a young straggler. The chase erupts, the ground shakes, tails whip through the air. It's a scene of constant tension, a balance of power between mass and muscle, instinct and strategy. Not all theropods were giants. The Jurassic also hosted smaller predators, scavengers, and insectivores. Dinosaurs like Ornitholestes and Calurus filled the middle rungs of the food web, nipping at carcasses or darting after lizards and early mammals. These species may have hunted alone or in pairs, using speed and agility to their advantage. Some even showed early signs of feathers, simple, filament-like structures that likely served as insulation or for display. In fact, the Jurassic was a hotbed for evolutionary innovation. It wasn't just dinosaurs that were getting experimental. Flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, had diversified into all shapes and sizes, from pigeon-sized gliders to behemoths with wingspans stretching over 20 feet. Primitive mammals had also arrived on the scene, not the dominant force they'd later become, but quietly evolving in the underbrush, feeding on insects and avoiding the notice of larger predators. The stage was busy, and everyone had a role to play. The plants were changing too. Ferns, cycads, and conifers dominated the landscape, forming thick, tangled forests. Flowering plants had not yet arrived, so the greenery had a strange alien look, spiky, waxy, and robust. These Jurassic plants had to be tough to survive the constant trampling of herds and the snapping jaws of hungry herbivores. Some grew quickly to recover from grazing, others developed chemical defenses. It was an arms race, and the plants were not unarmed. With all of this life came new behaviors and ecological patterns. Dinosaurs began nesting in organized colonies, returning to the same sites year after year. Some laid dozens of eggs at a time, burying them in warm sand or soil. Fossilized nests have been found with hatchlings still inside, suggesting some level of parental care. The dinosaurs of the Jurassic were not just massive, they were becoming increasingly complex in their social and reproductive strategies. Evidence from trackways also reveals fascinating glimpses into daily life. Whole herds left behind miles of footprints, preserved in soft sediment and fossilized over time. These track sites show individuals walking side by side, turning together, and even varying their pace to stay in formation. Some herds appeared to include multiple age groups, from hatchlings to adults, moving as coordinated units. In a world of enormous predators, there was safety in numbers. Despite the drama of giant predators and colossal herbivores, it was the balance of the ecosystem that made the Jurassic so remarkable. Predators kept herbivore populations in check. Herbivores reshaped the landscape. Plants responded to pressure. Insects pollinated, decomposed, and fed the food chain. Rivers carried nutrients through the valleys. Even dung played its part, feeding fungi and fertilizing the soil. It was a web of interdependence, woven from teeth, leaves, and sunlight. The Jurassic period stands as a towering chapter in the history of life on Earth. It was a time when dinosaurs rose from modest beginnings to become architects of the land. They weren't just occupying space, they were building it, shaping it, and dominating it in ways no animals had done before. Their bones would later be scattered across every continent, their footprints hardened into stone, their shadows etched into the memory of the planet. And at the heart of it all was a simple formula: eat, grow, move, repeat. The dinosaurs of the Jurassic didn't need to be clever, just successful. And in their own thunderous, lumbering, roaring way, they were. They were the giants who walked the earth, and their echo still rumbles through every museum hall and fossil bed, a reminder that for one stretch of Earth's long story, nature decided to think very, very big. By the time the Cretaceous period began, Earth was no longer a place of towering uniformity. The age of the giant sauropods still lingered, but it was giving way to something more intricate. The world had become a patchwork of habitats, shaped by drifting continents, fluctuating sea levels, and the quiet green revolution of flowering plants. Dinosaurs had diversified to match this mosaic of environments, adopting strange shapes, new strategies, and increasingly sophisticated behaviors. It was a golden age of evolutionary innovation, a time when life wasn't just surviving, but flourishing in spectacular, sometimes bewildering ways. The Cretaceous period, lasting from about 145 to 66 million years ago, spanned nearly 80 million years. That's longer than the time between the extinction of the dinosaurs and today. It saw the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea accelerate, giving rise to more isolated landmasses, shallow inland seas, and dynamic coastlines. This new geography acted like a giant evolutionary blender, encouraging regional variation and rapid adaptation. Dinosaurs that were once global began to localize, diverging into unique species across what are now North America, Asia, South America, and Africa. And with this geographic shake-up came the flowering plants, angiosperms, quietly bursting onto the scene with petals, nectar, and an eye for style. Before them, the plant world had been dominated by ferns, cycads, and conifers. Functional, yes, but not exactly flashy. Flowering plants brought color and fragrance to the world. They formed partnerships with insects, offering nectar in exchange for pollen delivery. This relationship sparked a co-evolutionary arms race. Flowers grew more elaborate to attract pollinators, and insects developed better senses and more specialized structures to navigate their flowery buffet. This explosion of angiosperms transformed entire ecosystems. Where earlier forests had been dark, dense, and filled with tough, waxy leaves, Cretaceous landscapes became more open, filled with varied textures and colors. The new plants provided a rich food source for herbivorous dinosaurs, encouraging further diversification. Duck-billed hadrosaurs, for instance, developed hundreds of closely packed teeth in conveyor belt-like arrangements, perfectly suited for grinding tough plant matter. These teeth were constantly replaced, giving the hadrosaurs a never-ending supply of chewing power. They were the lawnmowers of their time, capable of stripping vegetation with impressive efficiency. Hadrosaurs weren't just efficient eaters, they were also surprisingly social. Fossilized nesting grounds suggest that some species laid eggs in communal sites and may have cared for their young. Others developed elaborate crests on their skulls, some shaped like tubes, trumpets, or horns. These hollow structures likely amplified sound, allowing individuals to communicate across long distances. Imagine a herd of crested hadrosaurs honking through a misty Cretaceous valley, their calls echoing off the trees like a chorus of prehistoric tubers. On the more defensive end of the spectrum were the ceratopsians, like Triceratops and its frilled horned relatives. These animals came equipped with some of the most extravagant headgear in the dinosaur world, frills that flared behind their skulls, forward-pointing brow horns, and sharp beaks that could slice through tough vegetation. While the horns clearly had a defensive use, especially against predators, they may have also played a role in mating displays or social ranking. Fossils show variations in horn size and frill shape, even within a single species, suggesting that individuality mattered. Then there were the ankylosaurs, the living tanks of the dinosaur era. These squat, heavily armored dinosaurs were covered in bony plates and spikes. Some even had tail clubs capable of delivering crushing blows. Their design screamed, "Do not disturb," and it likely worked. Predators would have thought twice before tangling with a creature that looked like it had rolled out of a medieval weapons catalogue. But let's not forget the theropods. The Cretaceous was their playground too, and it's where some of the most fascinating evolutionary developments occurred. While earlier theropods like Allosaurus had ruled the Jurassic, the Cretaceous introduced newcomers with a whole different style. Chief among them was Tyrannosaurus rex, a predator that needs no introduction. With its massive skull, bone-crushing bite, and keen senses, T-Rex was the apex predator of its time. Its tiny arms may look comical now, but its jaws did all the talking, and they spoke loudly. Yet the true revolution was happening among the smaller theropods, particularly a group known as the dromaeosaurs. These were the raptors, Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and their feathery cousins. Unlike the lumbering giants of earlier periods, these predators were sleek, fast, and startlingly intelligent. They had grasping hands, sickle-shaped claws, and binocular vision. Their skeletons suggest they could run with speed and precision, using their tails for balance like tightrope walkers. Some fossils even show quill knobs on their arms, attachment points for feathers. Yes, feathers. By the Cretaceous, feathers were no longer just a strange novelty. They were widespread among small theropods and had diversified in form and function. Initially used for insulation or display, they eventually became aerodynamic, allowing for gliding and in some lineages true flight. Birds didn't just evolve from dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs, specifically avian theropods. The line between a velociraptor and an early bird is blurrier than once believed. Fossils of creatures like Archaeopteryx and Microraptor show a blend of traits: feathers, wings, claws, teeth, and long tails. These transitional forms fluttered through forests and climbed trees, living in a world where the skies were still a bit of a wild frontier. They laid eggs in nests, brooded their young, and likely communicated with chirps, coos, or even early forms of song. As birds were learning to fly, other animals were finding their own ways to rule the air. Pterosaurs had diversified into a bewildering array of shapes and sizes. Some, like Quetzalcoatlus, boasted wingspans exceeding 30 feet, rivaling modern aircraft. Others skimmed lakes, scooped up fish, or soared over coastlines. Despite being reptilian flyers, not dinosaurs, they shared the sky with the earliest birds in a complex aerial ecosystem. Meanwhile, underfoot, mammals were evolving too. Still small and mostly nocturnal, they skittered through the underbrush, avoiding the notice of larger creatures. But they were far from primitive. Some had complex teeth, keen senses, and even fur. They gave birth to live young or laid eggs depending on the lineage. Fossils of early mammals show them climbing, burrowing, and gliding, each adapting in its own niche, waiting for a time when the giants would no longer loom overhead. Insects flourished alongside the flowering plants, forming intricate relationships. Bees, ants, butterflies, and beetles began to play essential roles in pollination, decomposition, and even dinosaur diets. Fossilized amber from this period has preserved some of these tiny creatures in stunning detail. Perfect little time capsules of a buzzing, fluttering world that was just as alive as the one carried on giant legs. The Cretaceous period was a time of maximal expression. Dinosaurs had stretched into every conceivable form: towering, armored, feathered, crested, toothed, and beaked. They swam, walked, soared, and stalked through forests, plains, and coastlines. Their interactions with the world around them were becoming more complex, more interwoven. Plants, insects, mammals, birds, each had their part in a growing web of life. It wasn't just a world of giants anymore. It was a world of connections. Evolution was no longer just scaling up. It was refining, diversifying, specializing. The Cretaceous wasn't about brute force, though there was plenty of that. It was about detail, nuance, and the intricate dance between species adapting in tandem. The raptors chased prey that had grown faster. The herbivores munched on plants that had evolved new defenses. The plants relied on insects that co-evolved with flowers, while birds and mammals darted around the margins, navigating a living labyrinth. This was Earth at its most creatively chaotic, a planet bursting with possibilities, and for nearly 80 million years this balance held. Life moved to rhythms we're only just beginning to understand. The Cretaceous world wasn't just a finale, it was a symphony, a crescendo of evolution, played out across a planet where even the quietest buzz of an insect was part of the greatest show Earth had ever produced. Dinosaurs may be remembered most for their dramatic skeletons and fearsome teeth, but their true impact went far beyond appearances. For over 160 million years, they weren't just residents of their world, they were its engineers, architects, and regulators. Through their sheer size, their endless appetites, and their constant movement across land, they shaped ecosystems in ways that scientists are still working to understand. Their influence reached into the soil, across forests, and into the very air. Dinosaurs didn't just live in their environment, they molded it. To appreciate how deeply they influenced their surroundings, it's helpful to start with the herbivores, the plant-eating titans who walked through Mesozoic landscapes like living bulldozers. Sauropods in particular, with their long necks and barrel-sized stomachs, were major players in this ecological transformation. These creatures moved in herds across vast territories, eating staggering amounts of vegetation every single day. A single adult diplodocus, for instance, may have consumed several hundred pounds of plant matter daily. Multiply that by a group of 30 or more, and then by the number of herds roaming the land, and you begin to see the impact. They didn't nibble delicately. Sauropods swept their heads through the canopy like cranes, stripping leaves with peg-like teeth and gulping them down with a little chewing. Their simple mouths did not crush food finely, so most digestion took place internally, where massive gut bacteria broke down the fibrous plant matter through fermentation. The byproduct of all this, of course, was gas, lots of it, and dung, a lot of dung. And while that might seem like an awkward legacy, it was essential to the health of Mesozoic ecosystems. Dinosaur dung, also known more politely in scientific circles as coprolites once fossilized, was packed with nutrients. It helped return nitrogen and phosphorus to the soil, supporting plant regrowth and enriching the forest floor. The continual movement of herds meant that this fertilization wasn't localized, but spread across huge areas, creating pockets of fertile ground that encouraged plant diversity. In this way, herbivorous dinosaurs acted like mobile compost bins, nourishing the land with every step. Beyond fertilization, their trampling feet also played a role in shaping the land. Massive dinosaurs could flatten dense undergrowth, carve pathways through forests, and even influence river patterns by disturbing sediment and vegetation along the banks. Their sheer bulk left trails and depressions that may have directed the flow of water and encouraged seed dispersal. In places where sauropods walked frequently, entire landscapes might have taken on different features: open clearings, flattened grasslands, and pathways that smaller animals could use for travel or hunting. Then there were the grazers and browsers, smaller than the sauropods but still hugely influential. Dinosaurs like Iguanodon, Edmontosaurus, and other hadrosaurs moved in large groups, consuming low-growing plants and stripping branches clean. Some used broad beaks to scoop up vegetation, while others had specialized teeth for grinding. These animals shaped the structure of plant communities by favoring certain species over others, much like modern elephants and deer do. By constantly feeding and roaming, they maintained a dynamic balance between overgrowth and regrowth, preventing any single plant species from dominating the landscape. The interaction between herbivores and their environment wasn't one-sided. Plants responded. Over millions of years, some developed defensive adaptations, spines, tough leaves, or chemical compounds that made them less palatable. This feedback loop pushed both plants and dinosaurs to evolve in tandem, creating a subtle arms race where each party adjusted in response to the other. The result was a rich tapestry of ecological interplay, driven by appetite and adaptation. But the herbivores didn't work alone. Carnivorous dinosaurs, theropods, played an equally vital role. These predators weren't just fearsome hunters, they were ecological regulators. By preying on the sick, the old and the slow, they helped control herbivore populations, which in turn kept plant life from being overgrazed. Predation adds stress to a system, but in the right amounts, it's the kind of stress that maintains balance. Large theropods like Allosaurus, Giganotosaurus, and eventually Tyrannosaurus rex function much like modern apex predators. They didn't need to hunt constantly to make an impact. Their presence alone could shape animal behavior. Herds of herbivores would alter their migration paths to avoid known predator zones. Smaller dinosaurs might evolve to become more agile or develop better senses to detect threats. Even scavenging played an important role. Carrion left behind after a predator's meal attracted insects, smaller predators, and decomposers, forming a miniature ecosystem centered around decay and renewal. And then there were the omnivores, those adaptable diners who ate both meat and plants. Species like Troodon may have dined on small vertebrates, eggs, insects, and vegetation, giving them a flexible role in the food web. These animals filled in ecological gaps, adjusting their diet as needed and helping to transfer energy through different parts of the system. Insects would not have stood a chance. Small mammals and lizards had to stay vigilant. Nothing went unnoticed for long in a world full of opportunists. Bird-like dinosaurs, especially those close to the ancestors of modern birds, may have also helped with seed dispersal. Just as today's birds eat fruit and excrete the seeds far from the parent plant, feathered theropods might have played similar roles. Their movement from one area to another, along with the contents of their digestive tracts, could have helped spread plant species across broad regions. Even the act of scratching at the ground or digging for insects would have stirred the soil, helping aerate it and mix nutrients. Dinosaurs weren't just users of ecosystems, they were contributors to their construction and maintenance. Their behaviors echoed across the landscape, through nesting sites, grazing patterns, travel routes, and even social dynamics. Some species nested in colonies, returning year after year to the same spots. These gatherings disturbed the soil, influenced local vegetation, and created habitats for other organisms that fed on leftover eggshells or preyed on hatchlings. Fossilized nesting grounds sometimes show signs of repeated use, layered with organic material and marked by changes in plant composition. In these ways, even reproduction left an ecological footprint. We often focus on the drama, chasing, fighting, roaring, but the quieter influence is just as important. A single dinosaur walking across a field is a force of erosion and fertilization. A herd of them changes the way rivers meander. A hungry juvenile plucking berries off a shrub helps that shrub's offspring take root 10 miles away. Each individual is part of a larger biological machine, operating not in isolation, but in constant interaction with the world around it. In modern ecosystems, we see similar dynamics. Elephants push over trees and dig watering holes. Beavers dam streams and create wetlands. Bison churn grasslands with their hooves. The largest herbivores today are ecosystem engineers, and the same was likely true of dinosaurs, just on an even grander scale. The forests and plains of the Mesozoic were not static settings. They were living systems, constantly reshaped by the creatures that called them home. Even death played a role. When a dinosaur died, its body became a resource. Bones were chewed by scavengers, flesh devoured by carnivores, and the remains broken down by insects, fungi, and microbes. The nutrients released returned to the soil, supporting new plant life. It was the ultimate cycle. Life begetting death, death feeding life. Dinosaurs helped maintain this balance not through intention, but through instinct and biology. They weren't trying to shape the world, they were simply living in it. But their presence, their movement, their digestion, and their droppings all combined into a force of natural engineering. So much of what they did was invisible in the moment, but monumental in the long term. They sculpted the world not with tools or fire, but with footsteps and stomachs. They were the architects of ecosystems, designing, modifying, and maintaining a dynamic Earth long before mammals ever tried their hand at civilization. They may be gone, but the blueprints they left behind are still visible in the bones, the rocks, and the living systems that followed. Their legacy is not just fossilized, it is ecological. At some point during the Mesozoic era, a few members of the reptilian world looked up and thought, wouldn't it be grand to take to the skies? Not literally, of course, but evolution did begin to experiment with the third dimension. It sculpted bones, reshaped limbs, and lightened bodies until one of Earth's greatest biological feats was achieved: powered flight. The skies, once home only to insects and perhaps the odd leaping fish, were suddenly filled with the silhouettes of soaring reptiles and fluttering protobirds. The air had new rulers. Long before birds had perfected the art of flight, another group had already claimed the skies. These were the pterosaurs, close relatives of dinosaurs but not dinosaurs themselves. They were the first vertebrates to truly fly, and they did it with spectacular flair. The earliest pterosaurs appeared in the late Triassic, around 220 million years ago, and they wasted no time spreading their wings, quite literally. Pterosaurs came in a bewildering variety of shapes and sizes. Some were no larger than a sparrow, darting through prehistoric foliage in pursuit of insects. Others, like the majestic Quetzalcoatlus, boasted wingspans that may have stretched over 35 feet, wider than many modern gliders. These flying reptiles weren't just curiosities. They were some of the most advanced flyers evolution has ever produced. Their wings were engineering marvels. Unlike birds, which use feathered arms to fly, pterosaurs relied on a membrane of skin and muscle stretched from an elongated fourth finger all the way down to their bodies and, in some cases, their hind limbs. This design gave them an enormous surface area for lift and allowed for impressive control in the air. Their bones were hollow and lightweight, often with internal struts for strength, like the spars inside an airplane wing. Some had crests, bony, sometimes extravagant structures on their heads. The purpose of these crests is still debated. They may have helped with stability during flight, or acted as visual signals in mating displays or species recognition. One thing's for sure, they were hard to miss. From sleek spear-like crests to wild sail-like structures, pterosaur headgear came in as many flavors as bird feathers do today. While many pterosaurs were likely capable flyers, not all spent their entire lives aloft. Some waddled awkwardly on land using a quadrupedal gait, their folded wings acting like front limbs. Others, especially the smaller species, may have climbed trees, glided from branch to branch, or hunted fish by skimming over water surfaces. Their diets were just as varied. Some ate fish, others small animals, and a few even specialized in shellfish or carrion. Their beaks, teeth, and jaws evolved into a staggering number of shapes to match these diets, making pterosaurs a true aerial success story. But they weren't the only ones looking skyward. Within the theropod dinosaurs, a group already known for its bipedal predators like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus, a quieter revolution was taking place. Feathers, initially evolved for insulation or display, began to change. They grew longer, stiffer, and more symmetrical. Arms, once adapted for grasping or balance, were reshaped by evolution into wings. Bone structures became lighter. Muscles adapted to power short glides, then sustained flapping. Slowly, in fits and starts, the first true birds began to emerge. It's tempting to think of birds as separate from dinosaurs, But that's not the case. Birds are dinosaurs. Specifically, they are avian theropods, descendants of small, feathered carnivores that once roamed the undergrowth of the Jurassic and Cretaceous forests. The line between dinosaur and bird is not a hard border, but a spectrum, and it gets blurrier the more fossils we find. One of the most famous transitional fossils is Archaeopteryx, discovered in the limestone of Germany in the 19th century. It lived around 150 million years ago and had a mix of avian and reptilian traits. Feathered wings, but also teeth, clawed fingers, and a long bony tail. While it wasn't a perfect flyer, more of a flapper or glider, it represented a crucial step in the evolution of powered flight. Since then, paleontologists have uncovered a treasure trove of feathered dinosaur fossils, particularly from northeastern China. These fossils, preserved in fine-grained volcanic ash, show incredible detail: feathers, skin impressions, even pigment hints. Creatures like Microraptor had 4 wings, with flight feathers not only on their arms but also on their legs. Others, like Anchiornis, reveal patterns of coloration and complex plumage, suggesting that display and camouflage were already part of the aerial playbook. Flight reshaped everything for these animals. It changed how they hunted, escaped predators, found mates, and raised their young. It demanded new body mechanics: a keeled breastbone for muscle attachment, fused hand bones for stronger wings, and a more efficient respiratory system. In many cases, flight required trade-offs: loss of heavy jaws, shrinking body size, and the transformation of arms into wings. Evolution, as always, gives with one hand and takes with the other. But the payoff was enormous. Flight opened up new ecological niches that were previously unreachable. Forest canopies became hunting grounds. Isolated islands turned into sanctuaries. Insects, plentiful and diverse thanks to the rise of flowering plants, became easy prey. The ability to fly meant escaping ground-based predators, exploring new habitats, and dispersing more widely than ever before. It also led to new behaviors. Many feathered theropods began nesting, brooding, and caring for their young. Fossils show evidence of adults sitting on nests, wings spread protectively over eggs. Some built communal nesting sites. Others may have used vocalizations and displays to coordinate flock behavior. Flight didn't just change anatomy. It rewired social systems, parenting strategies, and even communication styles. Birds became the last surviving branch of the dinosaur tree. When the Cretaceous ended in fire and ash, most of their relatives perished. But birds, possibly thanks to their small size, flexible diets, and ability to fly, managed to survive. Their legacy continues in every chirping sparrow, soaring eagle, and waddling penguin. Each one carries the DNA of creatures that once hunted with claws and glided through forests untouched by human eyes. Meanwhile, the pterosaurs did not fare as well. For reasons still debated, they went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. Perhaps they were outcompeted by the rapidly diversifying birds. Perhaps they were simply too specialized, too tied to specific diets or habitats to weather the changing world. Whatever the cause, their reign ended in the same cataclysm that brought down most of the dinosaurs. Their bones, delicate and rare, now lie hidden in scattered fossil beds, a reminder of a time when the skies were not blue with jets, but alive with leathery wings. The history of flight in the Mesozoic is not a straight path. It's a tangled, windswept journey full of detours and dead ends. But it's also one of nature's most astonishing achievements. To take a creature built for walking, give it feathers, wings, balance, and lift, and watch it sail into the sky. That is evolution at its boldest. And it all started with a few simple changes. A feather here, a lighter bone there, a leap from a branch that carried just a little farther than expected. What followed was a symphony of flight, played out over millions of years. From pterosaurs who ruled with outstretched wings to the earliest birds flapping through dawn-lit forests, the skies became not just a new frontier, but a revolution in motion. 66 million years ago, on what must have started as an ordinary day, Earth met one of its most dramatic plot twists. Somewhere above the Yucatan Peninsula, a chunk of rock, roughly the size of Mount Everest, hurtled toward the planet at tens of thousands of miles per hour. The Chicxulub asteroid was not a polite visitor. It arrived uninvited, and it did not knock. In a flash of light and fury, it slammed into the Earth with a force estimated to be more than 1 billion times that of the atomic bombs dropped in World War II. The impact changed everything. To put it mildly, things did not go well for the dinosaurs. The immediate effects were catastrophic. The asteroid struck shallow coastal waters, vaporizing everything in its path and throwing molten rock, superheated water, and debris high into the atmosphere. The blast ignited wildfires across continents. Trees, grasslands, and entire ecosystems were set ablaze. The very air would have shimmered with heat. Animals near the impact site were obliterated instantly, while those farther away faced wave after wave of environmental trauma. It was not just a single moment of destruction. It was a chain reaction that spiraled into one of the most severe mass extinction events in Earth's history. The global aftermath was just as terrifying. Dust, soot, and aerosols launched into the upper atmosphere blocked out sunlight, plunging the planet into a kind of nuclear winter. Photosynthesis all but stopped. With sunlight cut off for weeks, possibly months, plant life suffered immensely. Food chains collapsed from the bottom up. Herbivores starved first, followed by the predators that relied on them. The Earth grew colder, drier, and darker. Acid rain fell. Temperatures fluctuated wildly. It wasn't just the blow that hurt, it was the long, suffocating silence that followed. And yet, even as disaster unfurled across land and sea, not everything vanished. Some creatures clung to life in the wreckage. Birds, those small feathered descendants of theropod dinosaurs, were among the lucky survivors. Not all made it, but enough did to carry their lineage forward. Their small size, varied diets, and ability to fly likely gave them an edge. Many could eat seeds, which survived even after most plants died back. Some could travel long distances to find safer habitats. Their eggs, buried in nests or cracks, may have been insulated from the worst of the environmental extremes. In the face of global collapse, it was the adaptable, the mobile, and the small that stood the best chance. Mammals too emerged from the shadows. Before the asteroid, mammals had lived relatively quiet lives in the Mesozoic underbrush, mostly nocturnal, often insectivorous, and rarely larger than a badger. They were survivors, not stars. But in the wake of extinction, with the towering dinosaurs gone, the world suddenly had room for new characters to take the stage. Mammals moved quickly into the empty ecological spaces. They diversified into herbivores, carnivores, burrowers, climbers, and eventually walkers on 2 feet. The age of mammals had begun. Insects, amphibians, and fish weathered the crisis better than many larger land animals. Their ecosystems were less dependent on the towering plant life that had vanished. Their reproductive cycles were faster, their diets more flexible, and in this new world, flexibility meant survival. Crocodilians, despite their ancient roots, also pulled through. Their semi-aquatic lifestyles and cold-blooded physiology made them especially suited to riding out the tough times. They could survive on little food, and they were not picky about where it came from. The loss, however, was staggering. Around 75% of all species on Earth went extinct. Entire families of dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and marine reptiles disappeared. The oceans, once teeming with ammonites and giant marine lizards, were suddenly quiet. Coral reefs collapsed. Tropical forests thinned. The land was no longer ruled by giants, but dotted with the footprints of smaller, quieter survivors. The Chicxulub impact is often portrayed as a tragic finale, and understandably so. The image of a T-Rex taking its final step, surrounded by smoke and ash, is burned into our cultural imagination. But in another sense, it was a beginning. By clearing the slate, the extinction allowed new evolutionary experiments to take root. It was a biological reset button. In the Paleocene and Eocene epochs that followed, mammals rapidly expanded in size, shape, and behavior. Whales returned to the sea. Primates took to the trees. Hoofed animals roamed open plains. Within 10 million years, a blink in geological time, the planet was humming with new possibilities. One of those possibilities, as improbable as it may have seemed during the Mesozoic, was us. Early primates eventually gave rise to hominins, and hominins learned to walk upright, make tools, and build campfires. Human civilization, in all its chaotic brilliance, is a consequence of that ancient catastrophe. If the asteroid had veered just a little to the left, or missed Earth entirely, the dominant life forms today might have feathers and claws, not laptops and coffee cups. In a strange twist, our species has come full circle. We are now the ones studying the bones of the giants that once ruled the planet, piecing together their lives from fragments in rock. We have discovered the impact crater buried beneath the Gulf of Mexico. We've found a layer of iridium-rich clay in rock strata all over the world, marking the precise boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene. We've traced shocked quartz, soot layers, and even fossilized fish with glass spherules in their gills, all remnants of that singular catastrophic moment. The story is still unfolding. Each new fossil, each new sediment layer, adds a little more detail to the tapestry of extinction and rebirth. Paleontologists have even found a site in North Dakota that seems to capture the immediate aftermath of the impact. Fish flung onto shore by waves, their gills filled with debris from the blast. It's like a fossilized freeze frame of the day. Everything changed. And that's perhaps the most remarkable part of this story. It reminds us that endings and beginnings are often the same event viewed from different angles. The loss of the dinosaurs wasn't just an extinction. It was an opening, a clearing of evolutionary ground that allowed something new to grow. In every thriving forest, in every wing beat of a bird, in every mammal nursing its young, the legacy of that moment continues. It also reminds us of the fragility of life on Earth. One rock from the sky, one bad day in the deep past, and everything changes. Yet life persists, it adapts, it reinvents itself. And in that resilience, there is something deeply hopeful. Catastrophe doesn't always mean the end. Sometimes, it's the soil from which something unexpected and extraordinary can bloom. In the ashes of one world, another quietly began. And in that new world, tiny feet began to leave new tracks in the mud, leading, very slowly, toward the future. It's an amusing thought, standing in a barnyard, watching a chicken peck at the dirt, completely unaware that you're looking at the descendant of something that once hunted through ferns and shadows with a mouthful of serrated teeth. And yet, as strange as it sounds, it's absolutely true. Chickens, and all birds for that matter, aren't just related to dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, living, breathing, feathered reminders that the age of reptiles never really ended. It just traded in toothy roars for melodic chirps and clucks. This idea used to sound outrageous. For much of the 20th century, birds were viewed as separate from dinosaurs, distant cousins at best. But as more fossils have been uncovered and technology has advanced, the evidence has grown too loud to ignore. Modern birds are not merely descended from dinosaurs, they represent a surviving lineage of small, feathered theropods. If you follow the family tree down far enough, you'll find that the branch-holding velociraptor, Deinonychus, and yes, eventually chickens, is one and the same. The realization didn't happen overnight. Clues began accumulating slowly, like breadcrumbs leading back through time. One of the most iconic came in the form of a fossil found in the limestone quarries of Germany, Archaeopteryx. This creature lived around 150 million years ago, and was unlike anything paleontologists had ever seen. It had feathers, wings, and a wishbone like a bird, but also teeth, claws on its wings, and a long bony tail like a dinosaur. It was quite literally a missing link, a chimera bridging the world of reptiles and the world of birds. Since then, fossils of feathered dinosaurs have been unearthed by the hundreds, particularly in China's Liaoning province. These discoveries include creatures like Microraptor, with 4 wings and feathers on its legs, Anchiornis, with strikingly bird-like plumage, and even theropods with complex coloration patterns, preserved down to the microscopic structures called melanosomes that give feathers their color. These were not speculative connections, these were dinosaurs, dressed in feathers, preening, gliding, and perhaps even chirping through prehistoric forests. But feathers aren't the only connection. The anatomy of birds and theropod dinosaurs overlaps in fascinating ways. Take the wishbone, or furcula. This Y-shaped bone, crucial for flight in modern birds, was once thought to be unique to them. Then it started showing up in fossils of non-avian dinosaurs like Velociraptor and Oviraptor. It turns out that the wishbone evolved well before flight, possibly serving to strengthen the chest during running or predatory lunges. Hollow bones, another hallmark of bird anatomy, are also found throughout the theropod lineage. These lightweight structures made movement more efficient, whether for running after prey or eventually flying through the air. Theropods also had three-toed limbs, backward-facing pubic bones in some cases, and complex air sac systems for respiration, traits all found in birds today. Even their posture speaks volumes. Like birds, many theropods held their bodies horizontally, with tails stretched out for balance. Their arms were flexible and wing-like, capable of folding in the same way a bird tucks its wings. Some had claws on their hands, others evolved reduced digits. The deeper researchers looked, the more they found. These weren't two separate lineages running in parallel. They were one long continuous story written in bone and feather. And then there's the DNA. In 2008, researchers managed to extract partial protein sequences from the fossilized remains of a Tyrannosaurus rex. What they found was shocking. The proteins closely matched those of modern chickens and ostriches. While we don't yet have a complete dinosaur genome, and likely never will, this molecular echo suggests that the link between modern birds and ancient dinosaurs isn't just structural. It's written into their genetic code. Modern chickens are in many ways walking fossils. Their skeletons retain echoes of their ancestors. Their eggs are laid with hardened shells, just like theropods. Their feet sport scaly skin and claws, even as their bodies are covered in feathers. Some breeds, like the silkie, even have feathered feet, a reminder that evolution rarely moves in straight lines. Inside the developing embryo of a chick, you can see tiny vestigial traits, like teeth, that never fully form but whisper of a time when their ancestors had mouths full of them. In laboratories, scientists have even begun tweaking the genes of chicken embryos, not to create anything monstrous, but to understand how ancient traits were lost or modified. By inhibiting certain genetic pathways, researchers have induced chickens to grow snout-like beaks instead of modern ones, or to develop more primitive tail structures. These reverse engineering experiments don't result in actual dinosaurs, but they do provide insight into how evolution sculpted bird anatomy from its dinosaur blueprint. But birds didn't just inherit bodies from their ancestors, they inherited behavior too. Nesting, for instance. Many theropods are now believed to have built nests, laid eggs in organized patterns, and even brooded their young. Some fossilized specimens have been found in the classic brooding posture, arms stretched protectively over their clutch, just like a hen today. There's even evidence that some species may have been warm-blooded, maintained social groups, and engaged in complex displays. Again, all behaviors we associate with modern birds. Even the sounds of the Mesozoic might not have been too unfamiliar. While we can't know exactly what a velociraptor sounded like, studies of vocal anatomy suggest that at least some dinosaurs may have made cooing or booming calls similar to pigeons or ostriches, rather than Hollywood-style roars. So if you've ever been startled by a rooster's crow, consider that a tiny echo of an ancient chorus that once filled the forests and floodplains of the Cretaceous. Of course, not all dinosaurs became birds. The lineage that led to modern birds was just one twig on a sprawling family tree. Most dinosaurs, including the great sauropods and the horned ceratopsians, perished in the mass extinction event 66 million years ago. But birds, small and adaptable, made it through. They flew over the wreckage, nested in the ashes, and began again. Today there are over 10,000 known species of birds, making them the most diverse group of land vertebrates alive. They live on every continent, from icy cliffs to tropical rainforests. They sing, soar, hunt, swim, and perform elaborate dances. Their colors dazzle, their songs inspire. They have colonized every corner of the planet, and they owe their success to their dinosaur heritage. And yes, even the humble chicken, scratching in the dirt for a worm or pacing nervously in a coop, carries that legacy. Its beak, its bone structure, its nesting habits, all trace back through the ages to a world of claws, feathers, and sharp eyes. It's easy to forget when you're eating breakfast or watching them strut across a field, but chickens are, in the most literal sense, modern-day dinosaurs. In a way, they're proof that extinction is not always the end of the story. Sometimes it's just a costume change. The thunderous reptiles of the Mesozoic never fully disappeared. They just shrank, sprouted feathers, and took to the skies. Or the barnyard. So next time you hear a bird call or watch a chicken pecking curiously at a bug, take a moment to appreciate the weight of history behind that moment. You're not just watching a bird. You're witnessing the last surviving dinosaurs go about their day. Quietly, casually, unaware of the legacy they carry. When you flip on a light switch or hop into a car and press the accelerator, you're tapping into a remarkably ancient energy source, one that predates humanity, civilization, and even the dinosaurs themselves. Fossil fuels, the lifeblood of modern industry, have their roots deep in the swamps, seas, and forests of prehistoric Earth. Much of what powers our lives today was formed during and before the age of dinosaurs, forged not by machines or factories, but by the patient work of time, pressure, and decomposition. Let's begin with what fossil fuels actually are. Coal, oil, and natural gas. All these substances started as organic material. Plants, algae, and tiny marine organisms lived out their lives, died, and were buried in sediment. Over millions of years, these remains were compacted and transformed by heat and pressure deep beneath the Earth's surface. The result was a suite of combustible resources packed with stored solar energy, sunlight captured by ancient photosynthesis, and locked away underground like a planetary savings account. The story begins long before the first dinosaur ever thundered across a fern-covered plain. Some of the earliest fossil fuel deposits date back over 300 million years to the Carboniferous period. This was a time when Earth was blanketed in steamy, swampy forests filled with towering tree ferns, club mosses, and giant horsetails. These plants grew in waterlogged soils where, when they died, their remains piled up instead of fully decomposing. Oxygen was limited, so instead of rotting away completely, the plant matter formed thick mats of peat, essentially the soggy prequel to coal. As more sediment accumulated on top of the peat, the weight and heat compressed it over time, transforming it first into lignite, a soft brown coal, then bituminous coal, and eventually into anthracite, the hardest and most energy-dense form. Coal from these Carboniferous forests would later be mined during the Industrial Revolution, feeding steam engines and lighting lamps, and eventually fueling power plants and steel factories. When you look at a piece of coal, you're literally holding ancient sunlight, and the remnants of forest that flourished long before the dinosaurs became the stars of the show. But the age of dinosaurs, the Mesozoic era, spanning the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, also played a critical role in the formation of fossil fuels, particularly oil and natural gas. Unlike coal, which comes mostly from terrestrial plants, oil and gas are largely the result of ancient marine environments. During the Mesozoic, vast shallow seas covered large parts of the continents. These warm, nutrient-rich waters teemed with microscopic life. Plankton, algae, and tiny shelled creatures drifting with the currents and basking in sunlight. When these organisms died, their bodies settled on the seafloor, mixing with mud and clay in low oxygen conditions. Over time, thick layers of organic-rich sediment built up, trapping the carbon from these marine creatures. As the layers were buried deeper, rising temperatures and pressures began to cook the organic material, breaking it down into simpler hydrocarbons. These eventually formed crude oil and natural gas, which then migrated through porous rock until becoming trapped beneath impermeable layers called cap rocks. Some of the richest oil reserves today, those in the Middle East for example, were formed during this time, beneath ancient seas that once lapped against the shores of prehistoric continents. These reservoirs don't contain liquefied dinosaurs despite the popular myth. You're not pouring a velociraptor into your gas tank. Instead, you're burning the remains of trillions of microscopic marine organisms, compressed and transformed over eons into liquid sunlight. Still, dinosaurs did play an indirect role. Their impact on ancient ecosystems through grazing, migration, and nutrient cycling helped shape the environments that supported vast plant and plankton growth. They created disturbances, trampled vegetation, and fertilized soils. By influencing the structure and productivity of ancient landscapes, dinosaurs contributed to the balance of life and death that ultimately determined how much biomass ended up buried and fossilized. It's also worth noting that some fossil fuel deposits do contain more direct dinosaur traces, albeit rarely. In certain coal beds and sedimentary rock layers, paleontologists have found fossilized plants and even dinosaur footprints, eggshells, or bones. These are usually found near, not within, the actual fuel-bearing strata. But their presence tells a story of interconnected worlds. Forests that dinosaurs once walked through, now buried and burning in our engines. The sheer timescale involved is mind-bending. The coal we burn today began forming hundreds of millions of years ago. The oil powering jets and cars started its journey beneath the seas that existed when Pangaea was breaking apart. These resources took unimaginable stretches of time to form, millions of years for every layer of compressed peat, every barrel of crude. And yet, in the blink of a geological eye, humanity has learned to extract and consume them at an astonishing rate. By tapping into these fuels, we've built cities, moved mountains, and changed the face of the earth. But there's a cost. Burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, a greenhouse gas that traps heat and drives climate change. Ironically, the carbon locked away during the Mesozoic, carbon removed from the atmosphere by plants and plankton, is now being returned at a speed far beyond what natural systems can absorb. In a strange twist, the very materials that helped cool the Earth long ago are now contributing to its warming. This feedback loop links us directly to the deep past. Our highways, factories, and smartphones are powered by ancient life. Every gallon of fuel we use is a nod to ecosystems long vanished. Every spark from a coal-fired power plant is a whisper from a primeval forest, transformed by time into energy we now take for granted. And with that connection comes responsibility. Understanding where our energy comes from and what it costs, not just economically, but ecologically and historically, is essential. The legacy of the Mesozoic is not just embedded in fossils and bones, but also in the very ground beneath our feet. It's in the shale formations we drill, the oil fields we tap, the gas pipelines that snake across continents. These are not just industrial achievements, they're links to an ancient world that still fuels the modern one. And as we look for cleaner, more sustainable energy solutions, it's worth remembering that fossil fuels, for all their utility, are a finite gift from a distant, buried past. Eventually we'll run out of the energy stored in ancient swamps and seas. The reservoirs will dry up, the seams will thin, and the carbon cycle will have to find a new balance. When that happens, what will we have left? Hopefully a better understanding of where we came from, and how deeply our present is shaped by the deep past. Next time you see a flame flicker or a car engine hum to life, consider the journey it took to get there. That energy began in sunlight falling on a carboniferous tree or a drifting Mesozoic plankton bloom. It lived, died, sank, and transformed. It waited quietly beneath layers of earth for hundreds of millions of years. And now, for just a moment, it lights up our world, before disappearing in a puff of carbon as ephemeral as the creatures who created it. The ground beneath us is more than just rock and soil. It's a history book written in pressure and heat, sealed in darkness, and opened only when we're ready to read it. And with every barrel and every spark, we turn one more page. Long before dinosaurs became pop culture icons with their own theme parks and merchandise, they were the source of heated rivalries, spectacular discoveries, and a scientific movement that quite literally reshaped our understanding of deep time. The story of how dinosaurs went from mysterious bones sticking out of cliff sides to full-fledged superstars of science is one of obsession, competition, and at times just the tiniest bit of madness. It began in earnest during the 19th century, in an era now remembered as the golden age of fossil discovery. and at the heart of it was a feud so intense it has its own chapter in scientific history. The roots of paleontology go back further, of course. Ancient peoples found fossils long before they knew what they were. Some cultures believed they were the remains of dragons, others thought them relics of biblical giants. Even the Greek philosopher Xenophanes noticed seashells on mountaintops and concluded, correctly, that land had once been underwater. But it wasn't until the Enlightenment that scholars began to seriously consider fossils as evidence of a changing Earth, and only by the early 1800s did the idea of extinction gain traction. Before that, the very notion that a species could vanish entirely was controversial. After all, how could a benevolent and perfect creation include creatures that no longer had a place in the world? Enter Mary Anning, an unsung hero of paleontology. Working along the cliffs of Lyme Regis in southern England, she discovered the first complete ichthyosaurus skeleton and later found the first recognized plesiosaurus. Anning's fossil hunting was methodical and brilliant, and though she was rarely credited in her time, being a working-class woman in Victorian England, her discoveries changed the course of science. Without formal training or institutional support, she helped open humanity's eyes to the deep reptilian past buried beneath our feet. While Anning was collecting fossils with a small hammer and a keen eye, a different kind of fossil fever was brewing across the Atlantic. In the United States, the wide-open West was revealing its own prehistoric treasures. With each new rail line and frontier expedition, strange bones began turning up in hillsides and deserts. Some were enormous, clearly belonging to creatures no longer walking the earth. At a time when industrial progress was soaring and scientific curiosity was booming, dinosaur bones became hot property, both literally and figuratively. Two men in particular would come to dominate this period of discovery: Edward Drinker Cope and Othniel Charles Marsh. Both were respected scientists in their own right. Cope, a Quaker from Philadelphia, was brilliant, fast-working and impulsive. Marsh, the nephew of a wealthy banker, was methodical, calculating and cautious. They started as friends. That didn't last. Their rivalry, now famously known as the Bone Wars, was like something out of a Wild West drama with pickaxes and microscopes instead of pistols. What began as a scholarly disagreement quickly spiraled into one of the most cutthroat feuds in scientific history. They sabotaged each other's dig sites, bribed fossil hunters, accused each other of theft and fraud, and published slanderous letters in newspapers. At one point, workers under Cope's direction even smashed fossils with hammers to keep them out of Marsh's hands. And yet, for all the drama and destruction, the Bone Wars yielded astonishing results. Between them, Cope and Marsh named over 130 species of dinosaurs, many of which remain valid today. Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Allosaurus, Diplodocus, and Apatosaurus were all brought to light during this whirlwind of discovery. Some names were hastily assigned and later corrected. Cope famously placed the head of an Elasmosaurus on the wrong end of the body, but the sheer volume of fossils unearthed during this time filled museum halls and public imaginations alike. The dinosaur bones came from formations stretching across what are now Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas. The Morrison Formation, in particular, became one of the richest fossil beds in the world. With railroads expanding and mining operations digging deep into rock, fossil hunters had new access to previously untouched layers of sediment, layers that had preserved bones for over 100 million years. As bones piled up in museums and private collections, artists and scientists began attempting to reconstruct these long-dead creatures. Skeletons were mounted, sometimes with a little creative license, and displayed in vast exhibition halls. Dinosaurs became symbols of deep time, evolution, and the dramatic power of extinction. The public could now walk beneath the ribs of a Diplodocus or gaze up at the spiky back of a Stegosaurus and feel the scale and mystery of Earth's distant past. For many, it was their first encounter with prehistory, one that left a permanent impression. This fossil frenzy also helped transform paleontology from a hobby of curious gentlemen into a serious scientific discipline. Universities established paleontology departments. Funding was secured for field expeditions, New techniques were developed for excavation, preservation, and analysis. Fossils were no longer just curiosities. They were data, evidence of evolution, extinction, climate change, and tectonic shifts. And as more skeletons were uncovered, the narrative of dinosaurs evolved. No longer were they seen as slow, sluggish reptiles destined for failure. The work of 20th century paleontologists began painting a different picture. Dinosaurs as active, dynamic, and in some cases surprisingly bird-like. This shift laid the groundwork for modern interpretations, where feathers, nesting behaviors, and fast metabolism replaced the old swamp-dwelling stereotypes. Paleontology continued to grow. As digs expanded around the globe, fossil sites were discovered in Mongolia, Argentina, Madagascar, and even Antarctica. Each new find added nuance to the story, revealing unexpected diversity. Dinosaurs with sails on their backs, dinosaurs with head crests that trumpeted sound, tiny toothy predators no bigger than a house cat, gentle giants the length of a basketball court. The variety was staggering, the ecosystems more complex than anyone had imagined. The excitement of discovery has never truly faded. Fossils continue to be found in road cuts, quarries, and farmers' fields. Amateur fossil hunters still stumble upon jawbones and teeth while walking the beach. Museums still unveil new skeletons with fanfare, and children everywhere still go through their dinosaur phase, memorizing names longer than most adults can pronounce, and drawing creatures that once ruled the earth. Dinosaurs, once confined to stone and dust, became cultural icons. They feature in films, cartoons, novels, and video games. They've been wrapped in woolly scarves for children's books, unleashed in sci-fi thrillers, and used as metaphors for everything from corporate giants to extinct ideas. Their bones have inspired artists, poets, and evolutionary theorists alike. What started with mysterious bones and a few brilliant bickering scientists has blossomed into a global fascination. And through it all, the appeal remains the same. Dinosaurs are big, they're strange, and they're gone. They represent a world that was both alien and familiar, a world that hints at our own fragility and resilience, a world that asks again and again what stories are still buried in the stone. The bone wars may be long over, but fossil fever never really cooled. It just grew up a little, swapped out sabotage for collaboration, and expanded its reach across continents. Paleontology today is more inclusive, more careful, and more imaginative than ever. But it still carries the same spark, the thrill of peering into deep time and finding the skeleton of a forgotten world. And for every fossil unearthed, there are thousands more still hidden, quietly waiting. Ready to inspire the next generation of curious minds, amateur collectors, and scientists with pickaxes, notebooks, and just a touch of obsession. Long before science had a name for them, dinosaurs roamed the human imagination. Their bones, poking from cliffs and riverbeds, puzzled ancient people who had no knowledge of deep time or extinction. To someone living thousands of years ago, what else could those enormous unfamiliar bones belong to if not monsters or gods? Thus began a long and colourful relationship between humans and the fossils they'd yet to understand, one filled with myths, metaphors, and eventually movies. In China, for example, fossilised dinosaur bones were ground into powder and used in traditional medicine for centuries. Locals called them dragon bones, believing they belonged to mythical creatures of great power and wisdom. It wasn't an unreasonable guess. After all, if you stumbled across a massive femur or a sharp, curved claw embedded in stone, wouldn't dragon be one of your first thoughts? In Europe, similar fossils inspired tales of giants and serpents. Many medieval bestiaries included accounts of monstrous lizards said to dwell in distant lands, born from the bones of long-extinct beasts. These myths were more than just stories. They were early efforts to explain the inexplicable, to make sense of a world that, even back then, offered glimpses into a deeper past. Long before the word dinosaur existed, the idea of giant ancient animals had already taken hold, and when science eventually caught up, it only added fuel to the fire. The formal recognition of dinosaurs in the 19th century didn't calm the imagination, it set it ablaze. The first reconstructions were lumbering, lizard-like creatures with thick limbs and dragging tails modelled on the reptiles scientists were familiar with at the time. They were presented as ancient beasts, slow, dim-witted, and deserving of extinction. But even these early depictions captured public fascination. Museums began mounting skeletons in dramatic poses, newspapers published stories of terrible lizards, and illustrators brought prehistoric worlds to life with pencil and ink. As scientific understanding evolved, so too did the portrayal of dinosaurs. They grew more dynamic, more agile, more bird-like, yet their role in popular culture only expanded. They became fixtures in comic books, adventure novels, and science fiction tales. From the stop-motion marvels of the early 20th century to the blockbuster spectacles of today, dinosaurs have become some of the most recognizable and beloved creatures ever imagined. Few stories capture this better than the enduring popularity of Jurassic Park. Released in the early 1990s, the film combined cutting-edge special effects with the thrill of scientific discovery and a healthy dose of existential dread. It didn't just bring dinosaurs to life, it made them believable, real, tangible. Suddenly, people everywhere were picturing velociraptors stalking through kitchens, Tyrannosaurus rex bursting through fences, and Brachiosaurus calmly grazing beneath the stars. The movie redefined the dinosaur in the human mind, no longer just a skeleton in a museum, but a living, breathing creature that might, just maybe, walk again. But dinosaurs haven't always been portrayed as terrifying. In children's books and cartoons, they're often lovable and goofy. Purple singing dinosaurs teach kids to count. Friendly triceratops go on adventures. Dinosaurs have become so familiar, so domesticated in our media, that we sometimes forget just how strange and alien they truly were. They've been cast as villains and heroes, metaphors and mascots. They've been painted in every colour imaginable, from gritty realism to neon fantasy. Why do these long-dead creatures resonate so deeply with us? Part of it is scale. Dinosaurs were enormous, and humans are fascinated by things that make us feel small. A towering sauropod or a charging ceratopsid stirs something primal in the imagination. It reminds us that we are part of a vast timeline, that we walk on a planet with a memory far older than our species. Dinosaurs are a humbling presence, extinct but still powerful in how they force us to consider our place in the world. There's also the mystery. Despite everything science has uncovered, there's still so much we don't know. How did some species care for their young? What did their vocalization sound like? What colors were they really? Every fossil discovery adds another puzzle piece, but the full picture is always just slightly out of reach. This leaves room for imagination to flourish. Dinosaurs invite speculation, creativity, and wonder. They're a perfect balance of the known and the unknown. Then there's the extinction itself. Dinosaurs didn't just vanish quietly. They were wiped out in one of the most dramatic events in Earth's history. That sudden end makes them feel both majestic and tragic, like characters in a lost epic. Their story is one of glory and downfall, dominance and fragility. We admire them because they were mighty. We're drawn to them because they're gone. In this way, dinosaurs have become symbols not just of ancient life, but of life's impermanence. They remind us that no species, no matter how dominant, is guaranteed a future. They challenge the idea that progress is permanent. If the mighty Tyrannosaurus could disappear, so could anything. And yet, that story isn't entirely bleak, because in another sense, dinosaurs didn't vanish. They adapted, shrank, and became birds. That twist in the tale gives us hope. It suggests that life finds a way. It always has. Today, dinosaurs continue to evolve in the public imagination. Advances in paleontology have brought feathered reconstructions into mainstream awareness. Books and documentaries explore not just their bones, but their behaviors, diets, and social lives. Artists reimagine them in vivid colors, covered in fuzz and crests, dancing or dueling or nesting in colonies. Scientists share fossil finds in real time on social media. Museums now let visitors walk through life-sized reconstructions, complete with movement and sound. Dinosaurs have moved beyond skeletons. They've become characters again. And let's not forget how they continue to inspire science. Many young paleontologists first fell in love with dinosaurs as children, their curiosity sparked by a plastic toy or a museum visit. Dinosaurs are a gateway to scientific thinking, a way to introduce kids to evolution, geology, biology, and even climate science. They make deep time feel tangible. They make extinction feel real. They are in many ways nature's best storytellers. It's remarkable that creatures who lived tens of millions of years ago, with brains the size of walnuts and no concept of human existence, have had such a profound impact on our culture. From ancient myths to animated films, from scientific journals to bedtime stories, dinosaurs have claimed a permanent home in our collective mind. They are extinct, yes, but far from forgotten. In fact, they may be more alive in our imaginations now than they ever were in the wild. So whether you're marveling at a fossilized tooth in a glass case, sketching a cartoon raptor, or simply watching birds flit through the sky outside your window, you're participating in a very human tradition. One of fascination, interpretation, and reverence for creatures who ruled the earth long before we stood upright. Dinosaurs challenge us to think bigger, wonder more deeply, and look back with awe at a time when the world was stranger, wilder, and filled with giants. If there's one question that keeps paleontologists and geneticists on their toes, and also keeps screenwriters in business, it's this: could we ever bring a dinosaur back to life? It's a thrilling idea, tangled in both science and science fiction. The thought of stepping into a world where ancient reptiles once again roam the earth, breathing, moving, and thundering across the landscape, is endlessly captivating. But despite all the CGI magic and cinematic moments involving velociraptors and electrified fences, the reality of de-extinction is more complex and far less dramatic, at least for now. At the heart of the question lies one key ingredient: DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid is the molecular blueprint of life, coiled tightly inside every cell. It carries instructions for building proteins, shaping organisms, and passing traits from one generation to the next. If you want to recreate an extinct creature, the logic goes, you need its DNA. But here's the catch: DNA doesn't last forever. Even under the best conditions, DNA begins to break down after an organism dies. The long, elegant strands of genetic information start to fragment almost immediately, thanks to environmental exposure, microbial activity, and simple chemical decay. Within thousands of years, those fragments become tiny, scattered scraps. After a few million years, even those scraps are largely gone. And considering that non-avian dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, the odds of finding a complete strand of dinosaur DNA are, well, let's just say you shouldn't cancel your weekend plans. Scientists have tried. In the early 2000s, researchers attempted to extract dinosaur DNA from fossilized bones, amber-encased insects, and other unlikely sources. While some studies claim to find fragments of ancient proteins or molecules, most of these results have since been met with skepticism or outright refuted. The problem isn't ambition, it's chemistry. DNA is delicate. It degrades into meaningless rubble over geological time. Even in amber, where insects have been astonishingly well preserved, the odds of DNA survival are incredibly low. Beautiful fossils, yes. Recoverable genetic code? Not quite. That hasn't stopped the fascination. Advances in genetic science continue to blur the lines between what's theoretical and what's possible. In laboratories around the world, researchers are working on sequencing extinct genomes, not of dinosaurs, but of animals that died out more recently. Creatures like the woolly mammoth, the passenger pigeon, and the Tasmanian tiger. These efforts fall under the umbrella of de-extinction, an emerging field that combines genetics, synthetic biology, and conservation. The goal isn't always to bring back extinct species exactly as they were, but to recreate functional equivalents. In the case of the woolly mammoth, for instance, scientists have mapped much of its genome using well-preserved specimens from the Siberian permafrost. By comparing that DNA with its closest living relative, the Asian elephant, They've identified specific genes responsible for traits like cold resistance, shaggy fur, and fat storage. The next step: editing those genes into living elephant cells using CRISPR, a powerful tool that allows for precise genetic modification. The dream is to one day grow a hybrid embryo with mammoth-like traits, implant it into a surrogate, and raise a creature that looks and behaves like a mammoth. It wouldn't be a perfect clone, but rather a living proxy, a way of bringing ancient traits back into the modern world. Could we do something similar for dinosaurs? In theory, perhaps, but only with a twist. Since we can't extract intact dinosaur DNA, the alternative is to reverse engineer a dinosaur from its modern descendants. Birds. Chickens, for example, carry genes inherited from their theropod ancestors. Many of those genes are dormant or altered, but they're still there, buried in the genome like forgotten architectural blueprints. Scientists have already begun exploring this idea. In a project informally dubbed the Chickenosaurus, researchers have manipulated chicken embryos to express ancestral traits. By blocking certain proteins or activating specific genes, they've produced chickens with teeth-like structures, longer tails, and even modified snouts. These are not true dinosaurs, not by a long shot, but they are windows into evolutionary history, allowing scientists to peer back through time and see how modern birds came to be. This approach, sometimes called atavism activation, isn't about cloning the past, it's about understanding it. By studying which genes control certain traits, researchers can reconstruct the evolutionary steps that led from raptor to robin. It's a kind of molecular archaeology, one that reveals how changes in gene expression shape the form and function of living species. But even if we could create something that looked like a dinosaur, would it really be one? A creature with a dinosaur-shaped body, born in a lab, without the culture, ecosystem, or behaviors of its extinct ancestors, would be more like an artistic interpretation than a resurrection. It would have no memory of the Cretaceous, no herds to join, no predators to avoid, no ancient calls to echo across the land. It would be alone, a creature out of time. There are also ethical questions to consider. Should we bring extinct creatures back just because we can? What responsibilities would we have toward them? Where would they live? What would they eat? Could they survive in modern environments filled with pollution, climate change, and urban sprawl? Would they be little more than living curiosities in a zoo? Or could they contribute to conservation efforts or ecosystem restoration? Supporters of de-extinction argue that these technologies could help repair damage caused by human activity. Reviving extinct species might restore lost ecological functions or boost genetic diversity in endangered populations. Critics, however, worry that it could divert resources from protecting species that are still here, or lead to unforeseen ecological consequences. Nature, after all, is a web of connections, and tugging at one strand, especially with tools as powerful as genetic engineering, can create ripples we don't fully understand. And then there's the question of authenticity. If we bring back a mammoth with elephant DNA, or a chicken with dinosaur traits, is it really the same creature? Or are we merely creating shadows of the past, biological facsimiles dressed in prehistoric costumes? The line between recreation and reimagination is a fine one, and the more we blur it, the more we have to think carefully about what it means to resurrect life. Despite these challenges, the pursuit continues, not because we're hoping to build a real-life Jurassic Park, but because the process itself is fascinating. The tools being developed, CRISPR, genome mapping, synthetic biology, are revolutionizing medicine, agriculture, and conservation. The study of ancient DNA has led to new insights into evolution, adaptation, and extinction. We've sequenced the genomes of Neanderthals and cave bears, traced the migration of ancient humans, and uncovered genetic links between species once thought unrelated. So even if we never see a living, breathing Triceratops, the legacy of dinosaur DNA continues to shape our world in subtler ways. It's in the feathers of a pigeon, the embryonic tail of a chick, and the quiet ticking of the molecular clock inside every living cell. The dream of bringing dinosaurs back may be out of reach, but the journey it inspires is very real. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the goal isn't to recreate the past exactly as it was, but to understand it deeply, respect it fully, and use that knowledge to shape a more thoughtful future. Dinosaurs may be gone, but their story isn't finished. It lives on in bones and genomes, in laboratories and classrooms, in imaginations and petri dishes. As science continues to push boundaries, the line between what once was and what might be becomes ever more fascinating. Ancient DNA, whether recovered, rewritten, or reawakened, reminds us that life is not static. It evolves, it adapts, and sometimes, just sometimes, it leaves behind a thread, waiting to be traced back to a world long lost but never truly forgotten. Fossils are more than just ancient bones and petrified leaves. They are time travelers, offering us windows into worlds long gone. Each fossil, whether it's a tooth, a fern, or a trace of a footprint, carries with it a bit of Earth's memory, an imprint not just of the creature itself, but of the environment in which it lived. When pieced together, these fragments form a picture not only of life in the distant past, but of the climates that shaped that life. And as it turns out, those prehistoric climates have a lot to teach us about the one we're living in now. Understanding the climate of the distant past, what scientists call paleoclimate, is like trying to reconstruct a play after the curtains have closed, the stage has been struck, and all you have is the set list and a few props left behind. Luckily, those props include some very informative clues. Fossils help fill in the blanks, offering evidence of temperature, precipitation, atmospheric composition, and even seasonal changes from millions of years ago. They tell a story that is not only fascinating but urgent, because Earth's deep past is our only long-term climate archive. Take, for example, the discovery of dinosaur fossils in places like Alaska and Antarctica. At first glance, that seems odd. Dinosaurs were cold-blooded reptiles, right? Surely they didn't enjoy a frosty climate. But in the late Cretaceous, these regions were not icy wastelands. They were lush, temperate zones teeming with plant life and surprisingly diverse dinosaur communities. Hadrosaurs, sometimes called duck-billed dinosaurs, and small theropods have been found in fossil beds above the Arctic Circle. These animals likely endured long periods of winter darkness, possibly migrating or hibernating to cope with the seasonal extremes. What this tells us is that Earth's poles were once much warmer than they are today, free of permanent ice and capable of supporting forests and large animals. This kind of warmth at high latitudes points to a planet with higher carbon dioxide levels and a greenhouse climate. That's a far cry from our current world, where ice sheets cover Antarctica and the Arctic Ocean freezes solid in winter. But it also raises important questions. How did such a warm climate develop, and how stable was it? To answer those, scientists turn to more than just bones. Fossil plants are especially helpful. Leaves, pollen grains, and even tree rings can offer a detailed picture of prehistoric weather. Broadleaf plants with smooth edges suggest a warmer, wetter environment, while those with toothed or jagged edges hint at cooler conditions. Pollen trapped in sediment layers helps map vegetation changes over time, showing shifts in ecosystems that correlate with changing temperatures or rainfall patterns. In some cases, entire fossil forests have been found buried in situ, their stumps still rooted in the soil where they grew. Frozen moments from a warmer Earth. Marine fossils provide another layer of insight. Microscopic organisms like foraminifera, which live in ocean water and form tiny shells, are incredibly sensitive to temperature. When these creatures die, their shells accumulate on the seafloor, forming thick layers of sediment. By analyzing the ratios of oxygen isotopes in those shells, scientists can infer ocean temperatures at different points in Earth's history. It's like a chemical thermometer, preserved in limestone and mud. These marine records reveal that Earth has gone through dramatic swings in climate over the past several 100 million years. There have been hothouse periods with no polar ice caps, and icehouse periods with glaciers reaching into the continents. Sometimes these changes happened slowly, over tens of millions of years. Other times they occurred rapidly, geologically speaking, over thousands or even hundreds of years. When volcanoes erupted for centuries on end, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, global temperatures rose. When mountain ranges formed and drew down carbon through weathering, things cooled again. The Earth has always been dynamic, responding to internal and external forces in complex ways. One of the most famous episodes of rapid warming is known as the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or PETM. Around 56 million years ago, global temperatures spiked by about 9 degrees Fahrenheit over a relatively short period of time. The cause? Likely a sudden release of greenhouse gases, either from volcanic activity, methane hydrate destabilization, or both. The result was ocean acidification, widespread species migration, and extinctions in both marine and terrestrial ecosystems. The fossil record captures this moment clearly. A burst of temperature, change preserved in chemical signals, plant distributions, and animal remains. This ancient climate upheaval is especially relevant today because the amount of carbon released during the PETM is similar in magnitude to what human activity is currently adding to the atmosphere, only we're doing it much faster. Fossils, then, are not just markers of the past. They are cautionary tales, reminding us that climate systems can tip quickly and that life on Earth, while adaptable, is not immune to disruption. But the fossil record doesn't just warn. It also offers hope, showing us how life has weathered past climate changes and adapted to new conditions. After extinction events, ecosystems recover, new species evolve, forests return, coral reefs rebuild. The Earth, given enough time, finds balance. What it struggles with is pace. When changes happen too quickly, as they are now, the systems that support life, our forests, oceans, and weather patterns, struggle to keep up. This is why paleoclimate studies are more than just academic exercises. By understanding how Earth's climate has responded to past events, scientists can build better models of what may happen in the future. They can test how sensitive the climate is to increases in carbon dioxide, how sea levels rise and fall in response to warming, and how long it takes for ecosystems to rebound. These models are essential tools for predicting and preparing for modern climate challenges. Fossils also remind us that everything is connected. The climate affects where animals live, what plants grow, how oceans circulate, and how ice forms and melts. A change in temperature ripples outward, altering everything from rainfall patterns to evolutionary pressures. Dinosaurs once thrived in polar forests, only to be swept away by sudden catastrophe. Ferns once blanketed continents that are now deserts. Coral reefs rose and fell with the tides of ancient warming and cooling. These stories told in stone are mirrors for our own time. And then there's the simple wonder of it all. Holding a fossil leaf in your hand, you're not just touching a rock, you're touching weather. You're feeling the imprint of ancient sunlight, ancient rain, ancient air. That leaf once fluttered in a breeze beneath a sky untouched by human industry. That shell once housed a creature drifting through warm seas when mammals were still walking on tiptoe through undergrowth. These objects connect us to the planet in ways that numbers and charts never quite can. So while fossils might first appear to be relics of long-dead creatures, they're also records of Earth's breath and heartbeat. They're climate diaries, written not in ink but in structure and isotope, in the layering of sediment and the chemistry of ancient shells. They teach us not only what lived, but what it lived through. And as we face a century of rising temperatures, shifting coastlines, and ecological uncertainty, these ancient records take on new meaning. They ground us, they challenge us, and they quietly suggest that while Earth can survive just about anything, it's up to us to decide whether we want to be part of the next chapter, or just another curious entry in the fossil record. Not all creatures from the age of dinosaurs ended up in museums, some never left. While the great lords of the Mesozoic vanished in the smoke and fire of the asteroid impact, a surprising number of their distant contemporaries simply carried on, as if nothing had happened. Quietly, steadily, and without much fanfare, they slipped into the modern world with their ancient blueprints mostly intact. These are the so-called living fossils, creatures that look today almost exactly as they did tens or even hundreds of millions of years ago. They are time travelers in flesh and bone, reminders that evolution doesn't always rush forward. It sometimes pauses, takes a deep breath and holds steady for eons. Take the crocodile. With its armored hide, toothy grin, and semi-aquatic lifestyle, it might look like a villain from a dinosaur movie. But the truth is, crocodilians have been lurking around since the late Triassic, roughly 230 million years ago. That makes them older than the first true dinosaurs. While many of their ancient relatives have come and gone, the basic crocodile design has stayed remarkably consistent. If you dropped a modern crocodile into the Jurassic period, it might feel right at home, and the local fauna would probably know better than to get too close. Part of the crocodile's success lies in its versatility. As ambush predators, they require relatively little energy to catch their prey. They can go months without eating, bask in the sun to regulate body temperature, and thrive in freshwater, brackish, and even saltwater environments. Their sensory systems are highly adapted. They have pressure sensors on their snouts to detect movement in the water, and their eyes and nostrils sit on top of their heads, allowing them to lurk nearly submerged while scanning for dinner. They are patient, powerful, and perfectly suited to a wide range of conditions, but they aren't unchanged. Crocodiles have evolved over time, with some ancient species being far more diverse in size, shape, and behavior. There were once galloping land crocs, ocean-going crocs with paddle-like limbs, and crocs with unusual teeth adapted for specialized diets. What has endured is the core of their design: a low-slung body, powerful jaws, and a temperament that could be politely described as enthusiastically carnivorous. Evolution didn't freeze crocodiles in place. It just found a formula that worked and kept fine-tuning the details. Then there's the turtle, a creature that seems to embody patience itself. Turtles first appeared in the fossil record during the late Triassic, around 220 million years ago, not long after the first dinosaurs. Their iconic shell, a fusion of ribs, vertebrae, and dermal bone, is one of the most remarkable adaptations in vertebrate history. It acts as both armor and support, protecting them from predators while allowing them to withdraw their limbs and head in times of danger. Fossil turtles like Proganoculus looked strikingly similar to their modern counterparts, albeit with a few differences, such as a spikier shell and less flexibility in the neck. Today's turtles inhabit nearly every continent and come in a dazzling array of forms, from the tiny bog turtles of North America to the massive leatherback sea turtles that roam the open ocean. Some are fully aquatic, some strictly terrestrial, and others strike a balance between the two. They've adapted to feast on jellyfish, plants, insects, and even carrion, proving that a slow-moving animal with a heavy backpack can still make it in a fast-paced world. Like crocodiles, turtles have survived not because they're unchanged, but because they've adapted just enough to stay afloat, sometimes literally. Their slow metabolisms allow them to survive in low-oxygen environments. Some can hibernate through harsh winters or go without food for months. Others migrate across oceans, navigating with astonishing precision. Turtles show us that evolution doesn't always chase speed or size. Sometimes, endurance is the better bet. But living fossils aren't limited to reptiles. The coelacanth, a deep-sea fish once thought to have gone extinct alongside the dinosaurs, shocked the world in 1938 when one was discovered alive off the coast of South Africa. This lobe-finned fish, with its limb-like fins and primitive lung structures, had remained hidden in the depths for millions of years, quietly surviving while the world changed above. Another population was later found near Indonesia. Coelacanths are slow-growing, long-lived, and give birth to live young, traits that likely help them persist in stable, deep-sea habitats where change is slow and predators are few. There's also the horseshoe crab, which has scuttled across the ocean floor for over 400 million years. With its hard exoskeleton, blue blood, and spiky tail, it looks like something that forgot to evolve past the Cambrian. Yet this odd little arthropod is crucial to modern medicine. Its blood contains a unique compound that clots in the presence of bacterial toxins, making it invaluable for testing the sterility of vaccines and medical equipment. So yes, the next time you get a safe injection, you may owe a small thank you to a creature that's older than trees. Even the humble ginkgo tree qualifies as a living fossil. Known as Ginkgo biloba, It's the only surviving member of a group that first appeared nearly 300 million years ago. With fan-shaped leaves and a stubborn refusal to change with the times, ginkgos were once widespread across prehistoric forests. Today, they are cultivated in cities around the world, valued for their resilience to pollution and pests. In some Chinese monasteries and temples, individual ginkgo trees have been tended for over 1,000 years, quietly carrying their ancient genetics into the modern age. What all these living fossils have in common is not stasis, but stability. They found ecological niches where change is slow, predators are limited, or competition is minimal. Their success isn't about being the biggest, fastest, or flashiest. It's about being just good enough, for just long enough, in environments that reward consistency over experimentation. Evolution, after all, isn't a race toward perfection. It's a process of staying alive in a changing world, and sometimes the best way to do that is to hold on tight to a working design. Living fossils also challenge our assumptions about what evolution looks like. We tend to think of evolution as a ladder, with each rung representing progress towards something better. But nature doesn't work like that. Evolution is more like a branching tree, with paths that twist and fork in all directions. Some branches blossom wildly, while others stay narrow and quiet, bearing the same leaves year after year. Living fossils are those quiet branches, sturdy, enduring, and beautifully persistent. In a way, they're a comfort. In a world that changes so quickly, where technology evolves faster than we can keep up, it's reassuring to know that some creatures are still wearing the same outfit they picked out during the age of dinosaurs. They remind us that not everything needs to be new to be successful, that sometimes old ways still work. And that survival isn't always about transformation. It can also be about endurance, resilience, and the gentle art of staying the course. These ancient survivors also offer valuable insights for science. By studying their genetics, physiology, and behavior, researchers can learn more about the traits that enable long-term survival. What makes a species adaptable? What kinds of environments promote evolutionary conservatism? How do these organisms cope with modern challenges like habitat loss, climate change, and pollution? Their long history may hold clues to our own future, so while dinosaurs may be the stars of prehistoric history, the living fossils are its quiet narrators. They've seen empires rise and fall, continents drift, and ice ages come and go. They've weathered mass extinctions and global upheavals, and through it all they've kept swimming, crawling, basking, and blooming, steadily, stubbornly, and with a kind of ancient grace. Next time you spot a turtle sunning itself on a rock, or a ginkgo tree shedding golden leaves in the fall, take a moment to appreciate what you're really seeing. These are not just animals and plants. They're echoes of a world long past, still alive, still moving, and still teaching us that sometimes the best way to survive the future is to remember the past. Imagine life as a tree, not the kind you sit under with a good book on a sunny afternoon, but a vast branching, ever-sprouting tree that stretches through 4 billion years of Earth's history. At its base are the simple beginnings, tiny single-celled organisms clinging to life in an ancient ocean. As you move upward and outward along the limbs, complexity unfolds. Branches twist and diverge, forming fungi, plants, invertebrates, and vertebrates. Some branches flourish, some wither, and some break off entirely. Dinosaurs, magnificent and mighty though they were, occupied just a few of these branches, and yet, by studying their rise, reign, and fall, we gain a deeper understanding of the whole tree, and our own rather precarious position on it. The tree of life is not a ladder, and evolution isn't a race to the top. There is no final form, no ultimate creature waiting at the end of the evolutionary path. Instead, life diversifies, adapting to changing environments, new challenges, and unpredictable opportunities. Dinosaurs weren't better than the animals that came before them, nor are we better than the ones that followed. We're all twigs on the same tree, growing in response to the same forces of mutation, selection, and chance. To find where dinosaurs sit on this tree, we have to travel back, way back, to a time before feathers, fangs, or even bones. Life began in the oceans, probably as self-replicating molecules protected within cell membranes. For a while, these simple cells were all that existed, cycling nutrients and splitting into copies of themselves. Then came the Great Leap. Some of these cells began working together. Others swallowed their neighbors and turned them into power plants, what we now call mitochondria. With these upgrades, multicellular life became possible, and the tree's branches began to fan out in earnest. Fast forward to around 540 million years ago, and the Cambrian explosion paints the sea floor with an explosion of forms. Creatures with eyes, shells, spines, and jointed limbs appear in a geological blink. Among them are the early ancestors of arthropods, mollusks, and chordates, the latter being the group that includes us, and, yes, eventually dinosaurs. Chordates gave rise to vertebrates, which crawled out of the sea during the Devonian period and began colonizing land. Some developed lungs and limbs, others gave rise to reptiles, which laid tough-shelled eggs that could survive outside water. And from a branch of those reptiles came the archosaurs, the ruling reptiles, who would split again into crocodilians and dinosaurs. By the time the Triassic period rolled around, about 230 million years ago, the dinosaur twig had begun to stretch. These creatures weren't giants at first. They were small, nimble, and lightly built, adapted for a new kind of mobility and body plan. But evolution is fond of scaling up, and over time, dinosaurs diversified into forms that towered over the earth, flapped through the skies, and raced across floodplains. They became a symphony of shapes and sizes, experimenting with bony crests, massive claws, sharp beaks, and complex social behaviors. Dinosaurs ruled the land for more than 160 million years, a reign that makes the tenure of humans look laughably brief by comparison. And they weren't alone. The tree of life was busy elsewhere too. Mammals, birds, insects, flowering plants. All these groups were diversifying, interacting, and co-evolving. Dinosaurs were not separate from this web. They were deeply woven into it, both shaping and being shaped by the ecosystems they inhabited. And then came the asteroid. The Chicxulub impact didn't just prune the dinosaur branch, it shattered entire sections of the tree. Whole families of plants and animals vanished. Coral reefs collapsed, food webs disintegrated. But some twigs, small and scrappy, held on. Mammals, birds, amphibians, and certain reptiles made it through. From those survivors came the lineages that now dominate our modern biosphere. This is one of evolution's central lessons. Resilience doesn't always come from being the biggest or the strongest. Sometimes it comes from being adaptable, widespread, or lucky. Dinosaurs were spectacular, but they couldn't eat during a months-long global winter. Tiny mammals that could burrow and hibernate had a better shot. Life on Earth is shaped by catastrophes, and the tree of life grows back not according to fairness or beauty, but according to what can survive. Today, when scientists study the tree of life, they do it with tools the early paleontologists could never have imagined. Instead of just comparing bones and shapes, they now analyze DNA, looking for shared sequences and genetic signatures. Molecular phylogenetics allows researchers to trace common ancestors, estimate divergence times, and map out the relationships between species with increasing precision. And it's through this work that we now know birds are dinosaurs, that crocodiles are closer to dinosaurs than to lizards, that all life on Earth, from the mosquito in your garden to the moss on your roof, shares a common origin. Understanding these connections helps explain why biodiversity matters. Every species is a leaf on the tree, a product of millions of years of re-evolution and adaptation. When a species goes extinct, we don't just lose a form of life, we lose a unique expression of evolutionary history. And in today's world, species are disappearing at an alarming rate, largely due to human activities. Deforestation, pollution, climate change, and habitat destruction are all hacking away at the tree's branches faster than nature can grow them back. Dinosaurs teach us how fragile those branches can be. They were once everywhere, in every ecosystem, on every continent. They adapted to deserts, swamps, polar forests, and volcanic plains, and yet, With one catastrophic event, their world ended. Not because they were inferior, but because Earth itself changed faster than they could. By studying dinosaur evolution and extinction, we can better understand our own vulnerabilities. We live in an age of remarkable technological power, but we are still bound to the same ecological rules that governed the dinosaurs. We depend on stable climates, healthy ecosystems, and interconnected species. Our fate is not disconnected from the natural world. It is intertwined with it. And yet there's a certain comfort in realizing that we are part of this vast tree. Our species is not separate from nature. We are nature, an outgrowth of billions of years of cellular chemistry, shaped by the same forces that made trilobites, pterosaurs, and tyrannosaurs. That perspective invites humility. It reminds us that we're newcomers here, that the planet doesn't belong to us, but to all its inhabitants, past and present. The tree of life is still growing. New branches form as species diverge and adapt. Others go silent, leaving only fossilized traces of their once flourishing forms. But the roots remain, stretching deep into time, anchoring us to a legacy far older than our own. By exploring the lives of dinosaurs, we're not just satisfying a childhood curiosity or filling museum halls. We're studying a chapter of a much larger story. A story of life's creativity, persistence, and vulnerability. Dinosaurs remind us that life can be magnificent, complex, and resilient, but also that it can be lost. So when we look up at a bird in flight, or marvel at the fossilized skeleton of a Stegosaurus, we're not just looking at relics or curiosities. We're glimpsing pieces of our own story, twigs on a shared branch, travelers on the same ancient tree, still growing, still reaching, still very much alive. They may have vanished from the Earth tens of millions of years ago, but dinosaurs never really left us. Their bones rest beneath our cities and fields, their evolutionary cousins flit through our trees and across our skies, and their stories continue to ignite the imagination of every curious mind. They are written into the stone beneath our feet, encoded in the DNA of the birds outside our windows, and carved into the stories we tell ourselves about power, mystery, and time. Dinosaurs cast a long shadow, not because they were terrifying or titanic, but because they were woven so deeply into the very fabric of life on Earth, and because their story continues to echo through ours. For over 160 million years, dinosaurs reigned over ecosystems of dizzying complexity and richness. They evolved into forms we were only just beginning to understand. Some were colossal, with necks that stretched to the treetops and tails that swept the plains. Others were nimble and small, feathered and bright-eyed, possibly singing their way through ancient forests. They were not simply evolutionary accidents. They were success stories, creatures that found astonishing ways to survive, adapt, and thrive. Their disappearance, sudden and devastating, reshaped the planet. It cleared the evolutionary stage, allowing mammals to emerge from the shadows and diversify. In the great void left behind, a new chapter began. The ancestors of whales returned to the seas, primates found homes in the treetops, and eventually hominins walked upright on African savannas. Our very existence is tied to the extinction of the dinosaurs. Without their exit, there may never have been room for our entrance. And yet extinction is not the whole story. Their legacy is everywhere. Modern birds, whether it's the sparrow on your windowsill or the emperor penguin trudging across Antarctic ice, are direct descendants of the dinosaurs that endured the impact, the fires, and the long winter that followed. The avian lineage that threaded its way through the chaos of the end Cretaceous didn't just survive, it flourished. Today, birds are the most diverse group of land vertebrates on Earth, and every flap of their wings is a tribute to the resilience of that lineage. Dinosaurs also linger in our sciences. They helped birth paleontology, a discipline that combines geology, biology, chemistry, and imagination to reconstruct lives long extinct. The discovery of their fossils has shaped our understanding of extinction, evolution, and deep time. They've revealed the links between Earth's shifting climates and life's transformations. They've shown how ecosystems can collapse and rebuild. And they've given us tools to understand what it means when species disappear today. Their stories ripple through our culture too. Dinosaurs have captured the minds of poets and paleontologists alike. They straddle a unique line between science and myth, real yet almost unbelievable. Their bones inspire awe. Their scale invites wonder. They are part monster, part ancestor, and entirely captivating. Whether animated in films, molded in plastic toys, or depicted in vivid museum displays, they continue to fire the engines of curiosity and imagination. Even our daily lives are quietly influenced by their time. The fossil fuels that power our cars and heat our homes were born in ancient swamps and seas, ecosystems shaped by the creatures of the Mesozoic. The extinction that swept away most dinosaurs left behind organic remnants that, under heat and pressure, became oil, coal, and gas. In a way, every flick of a light switch reaches back into the age of reptiles, and every rise in atmospheric carbon levels reminds us that the past never fully stays in the past. Dinosaurs have also deepened our understanding of time itself. Their existence stretches our imaginations far beyond the human scale. Our entire recorded history, our cities, empires, languages, and revolutions fits into a sliver of the time they ruled the Earth. Their fossils are like bookmarks in Earth's diary, marking ages of heat and ice, eruption and extinction, birth and collapse. They teach us to think in millennia, to step outside our own era and glimpse a planet that pulses with rhythms slower and deeper than any human calendar. And perhaps that is their greatest gift: perspective. Dinosaurs remind us that Earth is ancient, that life is fragile, and that change is the only constant. They challenge the illusion that the world was made for us, or that it will remain as it is forever. Their disappearance whispers that no species, no matter how mighty, is immune to catastrophe. And yet their endurance, through birds, fossils, and memory, reminds us that life can endure, adapt, and begin again. In a time when ecosystems are under stress, when species vanish faster than we can name them, and when the climate shifts in ways that echo ancient patterns, the story of the dinosaurs feels more urgent than ever. They're not just symbols of what was, but cautionary tales of what could be. At the same time, they are beacons of wonder. They show us that Earth has been home to marvels beyond anything we could invent, and they invite us to become better stewards of the life that still surrounds us. So as we finish this long, winding walk through the world of the dinosaurs, one final reflection lingers. Earlier, we posed a few gentle questions, whether this video would help you fall asleep or keep you too fascinated to drift off, whether you might learn something new or find a moment of calm. If you've made it this far, then maybe the video did both, helped you unwind, and gave your mind something wonderful to wander through before sleep. Maybe you learned something small but delightful, like how birds are dinosaurs, or how ginkgo trees were once dinosaur neighbors, or how the very gas in your car started its story in a swamp from the Jurassic. And perhaps, just maybe, the world feels a little older, a little more connected, and a little more extraordinary. Thank you for spending this time with the Sleepy Scientist. Sleep well, dream of ancient forests, and rest easy knowing that even in our most ordinary moments, we're still walking through the long shadow of the dinosaurs.